A decade ago, 20-year-old Jamie Vardy was drinking in the evenings and getting into fights afterwards. And yet he dreamed of becoming a professional soccer player, playing in the 7th division, what would equate to a beer league, paying £30 a week. And yet 8 years later, the most unexpected thing happened from this kid from rural England. He would lead Team England at the European Championships. Just a few months prior, he would be named Player of the Season in the English Premier League for Leicester City, and despite 5,001 odds, they would win the title, called the greatest sporting upset in history. This would be featured, a book and a movie are coming out about his life story. And this dramatic turn of events has been featured in The Economist, the New York Times, and while many think this is a rags to riches tale, a deeper question looms for me. How did this happen? For over half my life, I've been fascinated why some people succeed and others fail. For over 25 years, I've been playing sports, represented 2 different universities, and I've learned about concepts of training, team management, and talent assessment, all concepts that inspired me into human resources. During this time, I analyzed YouTube clips, I read thousands of scouting reports of people, and even posted my comments in online section. And I believe there's a lot that we can learn about sports and what it teaches about people. Sports have helped transform society, such as, it's best shown through data analytics in the movie Moneyball. 50 years ago, a protest was staged at the Olympics, a Black Power salute. And the third, it's even helped develop a religion with Sachin as the prime god. I believe this quote best exemplifies it. In our day-to-day life, we spend 99% of our time on performance and only 1% on improvement. Yet in sports, it's all about unlocking human potential, and 95% of the time is spent on development with only 5% on performance. I believe there are 4 things that sports can teach us about ourselves. The first is judgment and decision-making. Whether in a date, going for a job interview, reading Zomato reviews, or assessing that TEDx speaker, we're all making judgments about the person in front of us. But we rarely question on whether those assessments are accurate or not. I believe sports is an excellent laboratory to study judgment and decision-making. The first is, rather than it being static, it's a dynamic environment. The second is there's significant time constraints and pressure underneath, and people have to be dynamic and make in-game situations. An example of this is through the sports psychologist from Norway called Geir Jordet. He studied a lot of professional athletes and professional soccer players, and what he's shown is that many of them interpret, analyze information, and execute, and that has an impact on their environment. When he studied professional soccer players, one thing that he noticed is that many of them look at their surroundings, observe before receiving a pass, and he studied this the number of times they move their head side to side. An excellent aggregate score was at 0.5, and yet one player scored well above this at 0.83, and that's none other than former FC Barcelona player Xavi. In a Guardian interview, he talked about how he's moving his head all the time, looking around, looking for spaces. And it's no surprise, anyone who's watched him has seen a direct correlation on what an incredible player is and the link between his passion, his passing, his vision, and noticing his surroundings. And he isn't the only one. Indian field hockey player Sudhara Singh is known for his muscular physique and dribbling, but more important than that, one of his coaches called him eagle-eyed, in that he has incredible peripheral vision, and that he sees things that others cannot. And he's not the only one. Becky Hammond was known for her on-court charisma and her passion and toughness, but the thing that got her hired as the first female coach for the NBA San Antonio Spurs was her basketball IQ. I guess for me, the real takeaway from this is that rather than front-loading our decision-making, making an assessment early on, we should have a much more dynamic view of how people are to get a complete picture. We should be mindful of how we assess and constantly revisit that on a day-to-day basis. The next aspect I want to speak about is about the role player. And it's no surprise, we're speaking about Becky Hammond, the teams she's on, the San Antonio Spurs, are full of role players. They always put their team ahead of the individual, the collective ahead of the individual, whether it's the extra pass, hustling back on defense. One opponent said they're always in sync, like it's listening to Mozart. And it's a bit surprising that the head coach for this is a near 70-year-old Greg Popovich, known for his volcanic temper and authoritarian personality. When Popovich was drafting NBA player Tim Duncan, he spent 4 days in Duncan's home in the U.S. Virgin Islands, touring the islands with them, visiting the ocean, swimming in the ocean, getting to know Duncan's family and friends, talking about everything under the sun except for basketball. Popovich wants to know his players, and that's the number one reason why he has succeeded as a coach. Duncan has played for Popovich for over 20 years, and he's a future Hall of Famer. And with this culture comes the results. Popovich has led the Spurs to 21 straight playoffs, including 5 NBA championships. One person who exemplifies this, role model is none other than Shane Battier. Now, Battier is an interesting story. When he was in high school, he was a superstar and was considered the best player in the nation. Then he goes to the number 1 team in the nation in college, Duke University, where he wins Best College of the Year. It looks like it's set for him, except it's a little bit unexpected what happens to him in the National Basketball Association. Statistically, he's average, not really a star. Athletically, he's a bit slow, and yet the New York Times called him a no-stats all-star for his incredible ability to make those around him better. He makes his teammates better at rebounding. He takes all the right shots, he's incredibly efficient, and he's a fantastic one-on-one defender. One journalist called him, the Barack Obama before the Barack Obama. He actually thought that Shane Battier was going to be the first black president. I think what all of this leads to is what Harvard Business School professor Boris Groyberg talks about in his book Chasing Stars, that there's an element of the external environment that helps develop these stars. Not all players can do things individually. A lot of it is their portable skills. I think for me, the real takeaway for this is thinking about how the wider environment creates and develops and nurtures these athletes. Not everyone wants to become the star of the team, the captain, or the high performer at the company. Many just want to do a job, do it well, and feel valued for it. Now, the third is mental preparation. I know, as I'm talking, it's a Sunday evening. In a few hours, it's a Monday. You're already dreading work, and yet I believe there's a lot that we can learn from athletes. Athletes are always focusing on mental preparation, beginning with pre-game routines. LeBron James throws dust over the scoreboard. That's something that's important to him. But for many others, it's listening to music. One example is, one research study showed that athletes who listen to Eye of the Tiger before sprinting actually improve their times. I think a really key thing about this is that music helps develop, it improves their mood, associates with a positive memory, and they get into the rhythm. Just think of when we go in for spinning classes and cycling. There's always hardcore music, and we embrace that. I think we've seen this mental preparation even during speeches and halftime speeches, and this is best shown through the film Lagan and Chalk to India. And not only that, in one research study, they showed that coaches who gave an angry halftime speech actually led to a better second half performance. And this is shown in Al Pacino's star, Any Given Sunday. I think a really important thing about this is not just to increase the level of arousal, but to also optimize performance. Confidence is really, really important in this aspect. And there's a direct correlation between confidence and outcome and performance. Now, there's 2 elements to this. The first aspect is coping. How are athletes able to cope under a considerable amount of pressure? Time is on, people are looking at them, the spotlight's on them. And the second aspect is, do they look inward at their perceived inadequacies and how do they deal with their anxiety? Or are they able to successfully focus externally and problem solve? Now, I know this firsthand. Just a few days ago, I was in a competitive tournament across Mumbai. I was well prepared, and during the warm-up, I was scoring every single shot. I was relaxed, was feeling in it, and I knew I was going to win. And yet when round 1 came, the time was on, people were looking at me, I choked. I couldn't make one shot. And this was just in beer pong. I think confidence is best demonstrated through two athletes that are quite well known. The first is Fernando Torres, who was once the best professional soccer player in the world. He really competed exceptionally for Liverpool, but after his transfer to Chelsea FC, a $50 million transfer, he really struggled with confidence, a new location, a new place, and a new system. He was a shell of the player he once was. And an anonymous player wrote to The Guardian a number of years ago that the level of self-doubt that can wrap a player is louder than a whole stadium singing your name. Torres has never since been the same. Similarly, I spoke to Dr. Sri Advani, a sports psychologist in India. He's worked with a number of different athletes on instilling a sense of confidence, and one of those is PV Sindhu. With Sindhu, she'd often make a mistake, get angry or stuff, and it leads to more unforced errors. Advani had to work with her on calming her mind. He encouraged her to do meditation and accept that it's okay to make mistakes and it's human. And instead of getting angry at yourself when you make a mistake, rejoice when you succeed. Sindhu's performance has still improved, and Advani continues to work with young athletes. For me, when I think of what are the key takeaways this is, it's the power of the mind on performance and affecting confidence, and there's a direct correlation between that. The fourth and final one is expression. Now, Leander Paes is a very well-known Indian tennis player, and in his critically acclaimed book, Open, by Andre Agassi, he talked about going against Paes, and he said, he was a flying jumping bean, a bundle of hyperkinetic energy. Still, he's never learned to hit a tennis ball. He hits off speed, hacks, chips, lobs. That all seems to work. After an hour, you feel as he hasn't hit one ball cleanly, and he's beating you soundly. Now, I saw Leander Paes a year ago, and when I saw him in this interview, he was full of energy, passion, and childlike enthusiasm, despite the fact that he's on the retiring and in his 40s. I think there's a direct correlation between the ability to express oneself and motion and performance. And he's not the only one. Serena Williams similarly has exemplified this. She's won 39 Grand Slam titles, and a New York Times cover story talked about there is no more exuberant winner than Serena Williams. She leaps into the air, she laughs, she grins, she pumps her fist. The Rolling Stone talked about how she's all grunts and glares. And that's a direct correlation, and it's no surprise because Williams came from the tough neighborhood of Compton, California, where she had to fight for everything. But it isn't just about emotion expression that's really important. Part of that is about thinking differently and how that leads to performance. Gregory Bernstein is a neuroscientist at Emory University who focuses a lot on how iconoclasts are developed. And he talks a lot about how they perceive information differently. It's more based on their past life experiences than an objective reality. And that sometimes they feel misunderstood, they embrace novelty, and there's a lack of fear. And one of the best examples of this is Bernard Hopkins. Now, Bernard Hopkins is one of the most successful boxers in the modern era. At 48 years old, he won a championship, and he's gone through many different classes of weight and all succeeding. And yet Hopkins has a very difficult childhood story. When he was 13 years old, he was stabbed 3 times. At 17 years old, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison with 9 felonies. He quickly said that he had to learn to change from a sheep to a wolf to survive. He learned boxing, he understood the mental aspect, and has since changed his life. After 5 years in prison, he walked out, and the warden said to him, "You'll be back." Hopkins never came back. I think Hopkins exemplifies this because he's one of the boxers that really focuses on gamesmanship. They talked about opponents don't worry about facing his speed or power, they fear what's going in on his head. One boxer, Oscar De La Hoya, said he's always 5 steps ahead of you. In order to survive in this game, Hopkins has had to look differently at different things and has had to adapt. Lastly, I just want to leave on a personal note. When I was 16 years old, I joined the soccer team in my hometown of Toronto. Now, initially, there weren't too many players, and I was a pretty talented player, so I was getting a lot of playing time, dictating the pace of play, starting in center midfielder. And yet I would always clash with the coach. We'd always have disagreements and so forth. And the coach, you could tell, he wanted to kick me off the team, but he couldn't. There weren't enough players, and I was performing and doing well. Yet over time, as I got older, more players joined the team. I saw my role shift from one of being a dependable, to potentially expendable. I was more and more getting subbed off. I was no longer the player I once was. So after 10 years, I said to the coach, we've been fighting a lot. I recognize my role has been differing. Perhaps it's time for a change of scenery for me. He quickly retaliated and said, no, absolutely not, Roland. You're the heart and soul of this team. For me, the key takeaway about this is that in sports, we have this incredible ability to tolerate difficult personalities. When we work in business or work in life, it's all about likability. A respected writer, Ed Smith of the New Statesman in the UK, talked about one has to be socially needy, energetic, likable, and yet there isn't a much great diversity of personalities on a team. I think when I think about this, it's an excellent example of expression and emotion and something that's transformed my life. Finally, just to end my talk, I've talked about sports psychology, I've talked about confidence, I've talked about what is the role of preparation, but I think the power of sport has an incredible impact on society, and I just want to leave that with a Nelson Mandela quote. Thank you very much.